He entered the most luxurious restaurant in the city, but was met with disdain. Worn boots and a simple shirt made him stand out among diamonds and expensive suits. But no one could have imagined that this stranger could buy the entire restaurant with a single phone call. Today he would teach an unforgettable lesson. The rain fell gently over Chicago as Michael Stevenson parked his dusty pickup truck in front of the Golden House, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He had just closed an important deal and decided to celebrate, even though he knew his appearance would clash with the refined atmosphere. His plaid shirt, worn from years of use, and boots marked by the red dirt of the countryside, told the story of a life dedicated to working the land. As he entered the establishment, the contrast was immediate. The space was dominated by crystal, chandeliers, silver cutlery, and people wearing clothes that likely cost more than an entire herd of cattle. The maitre d', a thin man with a neatly trimmed mustache, approached with an expression that mixed disdain and concern. "May I help?" "You, sir?" he asked, emphasizing the last word as if it were an insult. "Table for one, please," Michael replied, maintaining the dignity he had inherited from his father. The maitre d' hesitated, looking around as if searching for an excuse. "I'm sorry, but we require a reservation. There are several empty tables," Michael pointed out calmly, indicating at least 3 unoccupied tables in the main dining room. Embarrassment began to spread through the room. Executives in expensive suits whispered among themselves, while women with glittering jewelry shot disapproving glances. A young woman in a designer dress laughed openly, hiding her face behind a linen napkin. It was then that Helen Anderson, the chef and owner of the restaurant, emerged from the kitchen. She had built this culinary empire from the ground up and would not tolerate discrimination in her establishment. With firm steps, she approached the reception. "Is there a problem, Peter?" she asked the maitre d', who was still blocking Michael's entry. "Madam, I was just explaining to the gentleman that we need to maintain certain standards." Helen interrupted him with a gesture. "The only standard we maintain here is excellence in service. Please escort our guest to the best available table." The maitre d's face turned red, but he obeyed. Michael was led to a table near the window, overlooking the restaurant's interior gardens. The whispered conversations continued, now mixed with speculation about who this countryman was that the chef herself had insisted on accommodating. Helen watched from a distance, intrigued. There was something familiar about this man, in his dignified posture despite the hostile treatment. He reminded her of someone from her past, someone she had crossed paths with long ago under very different circumstances. The waiter approached with the menu, visibly uncomfortable. Michael received it with a calm smile, as if he were used to such situations. He ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and the chef's signature dish, without even blinking at the exorbitant prices. In the kitchen, Helen personally supervised the preparation of the order. Her mind wandered between the present and memories from 20 years ago, when she herself was a young chef trying to make a name for herself in rural Illinois. She remembered a farmer who had believed in her talent, offering her an opportunity when no one else would. The restaurant continued its nightly ritual, but something had changed. The presence of this simple man had disrupted the pretentiously sophisticated atmosphere of the place. Among the regular patrons, some began to feel uncomfortable with their initial prejudice. Michael savored each bite with the calm of someone who knows the true value of things. His phone rang discreetly, and he answered naturally. "Yes, go ahead and confirm the purchase. Transfer the $50 million right away." The words, spoken casually, were overheard by nearby tables. The murmurs instantly changed tone. Now the same people who had mocked him tried to disguise their curiosity. Helen, who was passing near the table at that moment, stopped in her tracks. That voice, that way of speaking, suddenly the memories clicked like pieces of a long-stored puzzle. "Michael?" she asked, approaching. "Michael Stevenson." He looked up from his plate, and for the first time that evening, his serene expression changed. A glimmer of recognition passed through his eyes. "Helen, it's been a long time." The unexpected reunion brought to light a story they had both kept hidden for 2 decades, a story that was beginning to unfold again, right there, in the same restaurant that was a silent witness to a shared past and secrets yet to be revealed. The Golden House was almost empty when Helen sat at Michael's table, bringing with her a special bottle of wine she kept in her private cellar. 20 years had passed, but time seemed to have frozen the moment their eyes met again. "I thought we'd never see each other again," Helen commented, pouring 2 glasses. "Especially after everything." Michael gently swirled the glass, watching the burgundy liquid dance. "Fate has its own plans, doesn't it? I came to Chicago to close a deal and ended up finding much more than that." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken memories. Helen still vividly remembered the day she arrived in the small town of Green Valley, freshly graduated from culinary school in France, full of dreams and an ambitious project to transform her family's old coffee farm into a restaurant school for local youth. "Do you still have that recipe notebook?" Michael asked, a nostalgic smile on his lips. Helen laughed, surprised by the memory. "My grandmother's notebook? Of course I do. That's where it all started, wasn't it? That confit tomato sauce you tasted. And that changed our lives," Michael completed, his eyes fixed on hers. Their story had begun with a simple tomato sauce. Helen had set up a small stall at the farmer's market, trying to sell her original recipes. No one was interested in the young chef who mixed French techniques with rustic ingredients. No one except Michael. "You were the only one who believed in me back then," Helen admitted, her voice soft. "When everyone said I was crazy for trying something so different, I just recognized talent when I saw it," Michael gently interrupted. "Anyone could have done the same." But it wasn't true, and they both knew it. Michael had done much more than just recognize her talent. As the owner of the largest agricultural cooperative in the region, he had opened doors for Helen to access the best products. He introduced her to small producers, taught her about crop cycles, and how to choose the freshest ingredients. "Do you remember Diana?" Helen asked, referring to Michael's daughter, who was only 5 at the time. A different gleam passed through the farmer's eyes. "How could I forget? She practically lived in your experimental kitchen." Is she doing well?" Michael hesitated for a moment before answering. "Diana is in London now. She followed in your footsteps, you know. She's a chef at a Michelin-starred restaurant there." Helen felt her heart tighten. Diana had been like a daughter to her during that magical year in Green Valley. The little girl followed her everywhere, wanting to learn every detail about cooking, fascinated by how Helen transformed simple ingredients into extraordinary dishes. "And Anthony?" Michael asked, referring to Helen's ex-husband. "Are you two still—" "No," she replied quickly. "We separated a long time ago, right after I left Green Valley, actually." The air between them grew heavier with this revelation. Anthony had been the reason Helen left the town so abruptly, leaving behind not only her restaurant school project, but also a story that could have been different. "Helen," Michael began, his voice more serious, "there's something you need to know about that time, about the day you decided to leave." But before he could continue, they were interrupted by Isabella, the restaurant's sous chef, who hurried into the dining room. "Chef, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation in the kitchen. The food critic from Gourmet magazine is here." Incognito. Sandra recognized him. Helen stood up immediately, years of professionalism overriding the intimate moment. "I need to go," she said to Michael hesitantly, "but we still have a lot to talk about." "I have to go back to Green Valley." "Tomorrow," he replied, also standing. "But before I do, I'd like to make you a professional proposal." Helen frowned, curious. "What kind of proposal?" "One that could change everything," Michael replied enigmatically. "How about coffee tomorrow morning? I have something important to show you." As she watched Michael leave the restaurant, Helen couldn't imagine that this reunion would be just the beginning of a series of revelations that would change not only their lives, but also the fate of everyone they loved. In the kitchen, the food critic waited, but for the first time in many years, Helen's mind was far from the dishes she needed to prepare. It was in a small town in the countryside, where a story had been left unfinished, waiting for the right moment to finally be concluded. The coffee shop chosen by Michael was in a historic mansion in downtown Chicago. Helen arrived promptly at 9, finding him already seated at a table in the inner garden. On the table, besides the coffee, was an old leather briefcase that immediately caught her attention. "Punctual as always," Michael smiled, standing to pull out her chair. "Some things never change," Helen sat down, trying to contain her curiosity about the briefcase. "And others change completely, like you buying farms for 50 million. "Actually," Michael began, his eyes shining with something that looked like pride, "I'm not buying. I'm selling. The keys." Revelation took Helen by surprise. Michael had always been passionate about his land, about life in the countryside. Selling his properties seemed unthinkable. "But why? The cooperative, the producers, they're all well taken care of," he gently interrupted. "In fact, they're the new owners. I turned everything into a self-sustaining cooperative. Each producer is now a partner with voting rights and a share of the profits." Helen absorbed the information, impressed by the change. "And what will you do now?" Michael opened the briefcase, pulling out architectural plans and old documents. "Remember your dream of the restaurant school?" Helen's heart raced. That dream had been her life's project until everything fell apart. How could I forget? But that was so long ago. "What if I told you that your project not only survived but grew?" Michael spread the plans on the table. "Diana wasn't the only child you inspired back then. After you left, I continued developing the idea. I created a culinary training program for local youth." Helen examined the documents, her hand trembling slightly. The plans showed an impressive structure: industrial kitchens, classrooms, organic gardens, and even an experimental restaurant. "Michael, this is incredible. But why are you showing me this now?" "Because it's time to expand the project, and I want you to be the executive director of the new Green Valley Culinary Institute." The proposal was so unexpected that Helen needed a few moments to process it. "But what about the Golden House?" "You built something extraordinary here." "In Chicago," Michael acknowledged. "But think about the impact you could have by training a new generation of chefs. Besides," he hesitated for a moment, "there's something else you need to know." It was then that Helen's phone rang. It was Diana, Michael's daughter, calling from London. Helen looked at the phone, confused. "Answer it," Michael encouraged. "She knows we're talking." With her heart racing, Helen answered. "Diana?" "Helen." The voice on the other end was filled with emotion. "Did Dad finally tell you about the Institute? I'm coming back to the States next week to take over the international cuisine department. Please say you'll accept. We need you." Helen felt tears forming in her eyes. Diana, that little girl who followed her around the kitchen, was now an internationally recognized chef, and she wanted to work alongside her. "I need to think," Helen replied honestly. "There's a lot at stake." "There's one more thing," Michael interjected, pulling out one last document from the briefcase. "About the day you left Green Valley, about Anthony." Helen felt her stomach churn. That was a subject she had tried to bury in the past. "What about him?" "I found this among the old cooperative documents." Michael slid a yellowed envelope across the table. "It's a letter he wrote but never delivered. I think you should read it." With trembling hands, Helen opened the envelope. Anthony's familiar handwriting filled the page, revealing a truth she had never known, a truth that could have changed everything 20 years ago. As her eyes scanned the lines, the noise of the coffee shop seemed to disappear. There were only the words, the revelations, and a story that needed to be rewritten. "This changes everything," she whispered finally. "Yes," Michael agreed, his gaze meeting hers. "And there's more, much more. But first we need to talk about Green Valley, about the Institute, and about the real reason we need you back." Helen's phone rang again. It was Isabella, her sous chef, with an emergency at the Golden House. Once again the present intruded on the past, demanding her attention. But now, with that letter in her hands and Diana's voice still echoing in her ears, Helen knew she could no longer run from the choices she needed to make. The past, present, and future converged in a single moment of decision. Helen stayed at the Golden House late that night, Anthony's letter tucked in her bag like a pulsating secret. The words she had read earlier still echoed in her mind. I lied to you, Helen. Michael never betrayed your trust. It was me who altered the cooperative documents, afraid of losing you to success, to your dreams, to him. The restaurant was empty now. Only she and Isabella remained, organizing the kitchen for the next day. You've been acting strange since coffee with the farmer, Isabella commented, putting away the last pots. Did something happen? Helen took a deep breath, looking around. The kitchen that had been her refuge for so many years. Isabella, I need to tell you a story. The real story of the Golden House. Sitting at the chef's table with 2 glasses of wine, Helen finally shared her past. She told how, after fleeing Green Valley, believing Michael had sabotaged her restaurant school project, she had arrived in Chicago devastated but determined to start over. This restaurant, Helen gestured around, was built with pain. Every recipe, every detail was my way of proving I was right, that I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong all along. How so? The Golden House is a success, but it lacks soul. Do you know why I never accepted interns? Why our kitchen is closed? Out of visitors, because I was afraid to open up, to trust, to teach, like I did in Green Valley. Helen's phone vibrated. It was a message from Diana with photos of the institute. The images showed young apprentices in practical classes, community gardens, and a restaurant school in full operation. Michael not only kept my dream alive, Helen continued, her voice choked. He made it grow. While I hid here, building walls, he was there opening doors for hundreds of young people. Isabella picked up the phone, looking at the photos with interest. And now? What will you do? Remember that expansion project we've been discussing? Helen smiled, a new gleam in her eyes. What if, instead of opening another luxury restaurant, we transformed the Golden House into something bigger? The next day. The meeting with the restaurant's investors was surprisingly smooth. Helen's prestige was unquestionable, and her vision for the future was contagious. The Golden House would become the Chicago headquarters of the Green Valley Culinary Institute, maintaining its elegance, but opening its doors to a new generation of chefs. Michael and Diana arrived for the special dinner Helen prepared to formalize the partnership. The kitchen, for the first time in years, was open to visitors. The aroma of the famous confit tomato sauce filled the air, the same recipe that had started it all. Do you know why I kept your letter all these years? Michael asked Helen as he tasted the sauce. Because I knew that one day you would understand that some recipes need time to reach the right point. Diana, now a confident and talented woman, smiled as she watched the two together. And some stories need 20 years to find their happy ending. Not an ending, Helen corrected, intertwining her fingers with Michael's, a new beginning. The Golden House closed its doors that night as an exclusive restaurant and reopened a month later as the first high-end culinary school in Chicago. The tables remained elegant, but now they were occupied not only by clients but also by eager students. Anthony's letter was kept as a reminder that the misunderstandings of the past need not determine the future. He himself, upon learning of the restaurant's transformation, sent a message of support and a request for forgiveness, which Helen granted with the maturity of the years. On a sunny afternoon, Helen was teaching a group of young apprentices the secrets of her tomato sauce when an elderly lady approached the open kitchen. "This smell," the lady commented, emotional, "reminds me of my grandmother's cooking." Helen smiled, recognizing in the customer's words the same enchantment she had felt when discovering her passion for cooking. "Would you like to learn the recipe?" The lady's eyes widened, surprised by the invitation. There, in that moment, Helen understood she had finally found the perfect balance between luxury and simplicity, between teaching and learning, between the past and the future. The Green Valley Culinary Institute, with its 2 locations, became a national reference in culinary education. Michael and Helen together proved that the best dishes, like the best stories, are those that combine unlikely ingredients with lots of love and a touch of time. And every night when the lights of the Golden House turned on, the aroma of confit, tomatoes continued to tell a story of dreams, forgiveness, and new beginnings. A story that, like the best recipes, needed time to find its perfect flavor. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Michael warmed your hearts as much as the aroma of confit tomatoes warmed the kitchen of the Golden House. To continue this journey through the flavors of life, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories about dreams, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Find it here by clicking on your left. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day, we bring new narratives that explore life's complexities and the flavors of love. Tell us in the comments, what was the special recipe that marked your life? What moment of new beginning transformed your story? Until the next story, with more flavor and emotion.